angelic experiencer, exopolitical ambassador, holistic coach, and transdimensional channeler. Her professional experience includes shamanic guidance, awakening, and ascension counseling, as well as public discourses. As part of the Forbidden Knowledge News Network, Karen hosts the Quantum Guides show. This weekly podcast is ideally suited to the newly awakened and for those who are awoke but may be socially isolated by their alternative beliefs. She also holds the new live podcast called Aliens and Angels, which focuses on personal and collective paranormal experiences. Karen believes that self-love and self-care build the foundation for personal activism, awakening, and ascension as we become the change we wish to see in the world. Check out Karen's unique content on most social media platforms at Karen Holton TV. So let's welcome our guest today, Karen Holton. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me back, Adam. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, we've exchanged interviews with one another, and as we proceed on this path of evolution, of ascension, as you mentioned, we're always looking to share information and help one another on the path to growing. And as I use normally, the path of walking each other home. And for me, it's we're allowed to escape the line that we're in, but we naturally need people in our lives. We need a connection. We need to find the right connection, and I think that's what this life is about: a journey to connecting with people who help us, assist us. And so maybe in terms of your work, you've just written a new book, which I didn't mention, which is called Transdimensional: Meeting the New Neighbors, which is a profound experience of your life up until now, and your experience as a child, your teenage years as a mother, and your connection to transdimensional beings, and your journey through it. And so I'm fascinated in reading the onset of the book and seeing it where it takes me, because I could see the journey and the dedicate, not only the dedication of evolving, but the struggles and the deep pains that you went through, which sometimes people use as a way of being a victim, but you really turned it around, and look, you have a book right now. Let me just show the audience the book. I don't know if it comes out right. Transdimensional: Meet the New Neighbors, and I think Karen has it in her background as well. It's very interesting graphics inside. The AI is fascinating. I've shown many people, and they said, wow, they're fascinated, by the different pictures and things that exist. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you were motivated upon writing this book.
Okay, but before I do that, I want to thank you also for the lovely introduction. Very kind of you, and it's just lovely. Thank you so much, and thank you again for having me on your show. Okay, so to be quite honest with you, I'm an ordinary person. I don't claim to be anything more than anyone else. We all go through our trials and tribulations. We all have our traumas. And to be honest with you, most of my life I was kind of screwed up, and I kept going to external sources for wisdom and for knowledge. And so I didn't realize for the longest time that I'm a different kind of person maybe actually I should reword that. Maybe I'm not a different kind of person. But what I found was that what the mainstream was telling me to do in the way of what to eat, how to think, how to conduct myself socially, spiritually, going to mental health, trying to get assistance, because I wanted to get myself sorted out. All of those things didn't work for me. And I had to finally learn that I need to follow my own path. And I think that might be true for a lot of people, Adam. And as soon as I realized that, and I started to go inside for wisdom and connect, like with my inner child, I went through some horrible things in my life, but you know what? Number one, could have been a hell of a lot worse, and I survived. And number two, other people are going through it too, and it's all relative. We might, there's no point in us going, it's not a pissing contest, who was the most traumatized or whatever. No, it's all relevant. And no, it shouldn't have happened, but it did. And let's take a look at what we can do with this different state of consciousness. So, what I believe is when a door closes, a window opens. And
Yes.
so, what it did for me was allowed me to have these amazing transdimensional experiences, which started when I was very young. And because I think what happens is when we're traumatized, we dissociate. And then we're able to set ourselves free and go someplace else. Where are we going? We're going into transdimensional spaces. And I don't think this is recognized well enough. And I think it's really important. I just want to point to the science briefly here and say the Monroe Institute has meditations, and the research they've done, they have found that there are ways to escape what we consider time and space as three-dimensional reality, how we can blip outside of it, outside of time and space, and recognize that there are dimensional realities that we're not taught about or we may not know. It's also well recognized that about 22 trillion times a second, we blip out of reality and back in. Just like if you take a look at subatomic particles, they used to think that they go round and round like solar systems. No, they blip out and they blip back in someplace else. Well, we're no different than that. And so I think that the process of having traumas in our life, there's a gift, but the gift comes, I think, after we have done a certain amount of processing, you know, and and I also found playing the victim role didn't help at all. In our society, it's really common for people to be on what they call the victim triangle, which is the victim, the victimizer, and the rescuer.
Yes.
And the victim has to have a victimizer. So there's scapegoating and targeting and transferring all their power to another person, saying that person over there hurt me. The rescuer comes in to comfort the victim, and they're all targeting the victimizer, who then goes off and forms another triangle as the victim. And we all trade places within this triangle, and that's considered normal, and it's not normal. And so what I did was I recognized that pattern in my own life, and I had to choose to step off it. Now, stepping off it into what? I don't know. You're in that liminal space. But what a perfect opportunity to connect with spiritual forces, our true self, our inner child, and find new ways of dealing with our issues, and to stop being victim oriented, because it doesn't help. And I found I had to get off the victim triangle before I started seeing my strengths and all the connections that I could make that were very positive, and just start going inside for wisdom and for contact.
Yeah, you bring up the subject of stories in terms of victimhood and the drama triangle. One aspect of our lives is important for us to be able to know our story in order for us to change it. And that
Mhm.
requires us to sometimes go back and not it requires us to somewhat relive the steps of what we experienced, so as we know how to not experience that again, or how to handle it the next time around, or to be a lighthouse
Mhm.
of information for others. Uh, you know, and
Mhm.
and I do understand it's like, through safety, through fear, families push people into certain roles, and we wind up playing these roles until we recognize that we no longer have to play them anymore, that we have our own autonomy. Um, so what
Mhm.
you're saying resonates completely with me, of taking back your power, which you have. Um, so yeah, you can go on a little bit more about like the steps of from where you're with the drama and the stuff that pushed you forward towards writing, or even not even writing the book, or the other
Well,
steps in between.
sure. So, the other thing I wanted to say is it took for me great courage to publish this book. I had never told anybody about my childhood traumas or about what it was like growing up with a, you know, an empathy deficient step parent. And, these are common things for all of us, but I never really told people. And I didn't want to portray it as a poor me, please feel sorry for me. I wanted to show how it actually emboldened me to have a better life and to be more open to these amazing paranormal experiences, which I think I did pretty good. I didn't get into anything too much, but I said enough that people got the picture, and I think that's important. I think that anybody who reads the book can identify in several places with their own lives. I am not that unique. I'm not that different. And I speak to the commonality of all humankind. And in the book, I also sort of create a juxtaposition to what I see as being wrong in our society and what they do right aboard the big ship, and how we can move into being more that way. And so it's basically, here's a healthy alternative. Here's another way of doing it. It's up to us whether or not we want to start being more like these transdimensional beings, because they're at our next stage of development. They're not that far ahead of us. They have been through wars and racial prejudices and all the crap that we go through. They've been through all that, but they got to the point where they had a higher understanding and they raised themselves above it. And then they created a new society for themselves. So our new society may not look exactly like the society on the big ship, but it really gives you wonderful snapshot of how we could be doing things differently, internally, on a personal level, within our families, within our communities, within our countries, and then, of course, everywhere in the world. So I feel that looking back now as an older person, everything that happened to me was an education. It was all for my higher learning, for soul development. And it's interesting that when I started having the transdimensional experiences, especially since the what I would classify as extraterrestrial experiences, I was just compelled to write the book. I knew I needed to somehow downstep these fantastical experiences into language and concepts that everybody could understand and benefit from. So it's kind of like my gift to humanity. But more than that, I feel that there was spiritual guidance to kind of pushed me to do the book. And so I wrote it. It took me years because I have sort of learning disabilities. I have reading comprehensive issues. I really struggled with the grammar. I didn't want AI to do it for me. Of course, we just had that more recently. But I also didn't want the spell check and the grammar correct to take over me writing it in my own voice. That was really important to me. And the other thing too is my memories didn't just all come from the initial experience. They've been released over time. So it's kind of like when the time was right, then I knew what to write. And I'd go out for long walks. And while I was out walking, I'd question myself. I'd say, okay, I'm supposed to write about this experience and that experience, but how do I write about it, make sure I get it so it's logical and make sense, and what details to include, what details not to include. It was quite interesting. So I included the first two chapters are just basically my origin story and being clear on where I'm coming from and how my experience is actually very different than most of the UFO and ET narratives that are out there. But it's sort of what I consider the missing components that need to go in there, that need to be taken under consideration along with the other narratives so people can make up their own minds on what's possible and what's not. And then in chapter 3, I kind of get into this group of extraterrestrials, what they've been up to, how they ended up being an independent group, how they handle things like resettlement programs, because they often will rescue humanoid beings and resettle them for various purposes. I wanted all that in there. I included a couple of actual experiences where I got to visit different worlds. One was a high-tech experience, and one was a low-tech experience. Interestingly, the low-tech experience uh, was my more positive experience, and the high-tech experience was my not so positive experience. But I wanted to give people a good idea of what's possible beyond the boundaries of our physical earth. Then I get into what's ET like? What do they look like? And I've got an image here that shows this is AI generated. I didn't actually take a selfie and bring it home with me, but it's pretty close. And the woman in the symbolizes me. I had very long white hair at the time. And one being on one side looks very much like a human. If you saw her walking down the street, you might not recognize her as being extraterrestrial. The other being on the other side of me looks quite different. Both are humanoids. We're all from the same species. We're just different family lines or races. It just gives you an idea of the range of what their physical appearance was actually like. Did you have a question,
No, no, I didn't have a question. No,
Adam?
no, go. Just go on.
Okay.
I'm very interested.
Okay. So chapter 3 and including chapter 8 is all about my ET adventures. So I also talk about the big ship, how I understood it. So that's the other thing. It's not like this book is 100% scientific, factual data. No, this is what I experienced as I'm able to tell my story through my own perceptual arena. This is how I understood it. It's very sociological, psychological, spiritual. It's not nuts and bolts, not at all. And so I talk a lot about the big ship and like what we do for food, how everything works. Again, these beings are very advanced technologically. I would say the two things that stick out the most is how incredibly healthy they are, peaceful and loving. But the other thing is they're also extremely technologically advanced than us. Then I get into what my orientation process was like. What was it like to suddenly be on board this big ship? How did things unfold for me? What was the process? And my intention with all of this is to help people to lessen their fear, to see these beings as being more like us than different than us, to see the potential of how we can step into living in harmony with them in our near future. That's the goal of the book. And it's also interesting because things are done quite differently there than here. I also get into an everyday, what's an everyday life like? What happens from the time I get up in the morning? What do I do? Where do I go? Who do I see? What is their work and training like? What's their leisure time like? What do they do for fun? What do they do when they get together with other ships? And I thought that was super interesting. So the big ship that I go to is huge. Like it holds millions of beings. It's beyond huge, probably bigger than the biggest metropolis we have here on Earth. But there are other city ships that come and join with our ship. And I'm not kidding. It's very much, this is just how it struck me as being like a clan gathering. And you see old friends, you make new friends, you exchange ideas, technologies, fashion, science, you name it. It's a very exciting time. And also, it would be different than a clan gathering is it's very quiet and very peaceful because the international language, the intergalactic language, the inter-transdimensional language is telepathy. And I get into great detail in the book of what telepathy is actually like. So a lot of experiencers kind of make it sound like all the ETs speak English and they just put English into our minds that we can think in English and they understand everything we're saying. And I found it not like that at all. It's a combination of like short visual videos that run inside your mind's eye or your imagination.
Right.
It's symbols, it's feelings, sensations, emotions. Most beings do some amount of gesturing while they're communicating. But this is the really cool part. I found out that, and part of my training, which I get into quite a bit in the book, was learning to keep my thoughts private and my feelings private. That is a huge, huge job. And so these beings, they run thought privately. They can run thought to just one or two or a small group of people, or they can sort of broadcast to a large group, depending on what's appropriate. So it's not just an on off telepathy situation. And keeping your thoughts to yourself is referred to, at least how I translated it into English, is called shielding. And it's how we show love to each other aboard the big ship. Because not everybody wants to hear all our random thoughts, especially when we come from speaking worlds and we're not used to disciplining our thoughts or, our emotions. And so it's a kindness. And it's something that we have to learn how to do before we can start training on the big ship, actually form more community, all of those things. So there are technologies that we can have installed in our biology that make it easier. But I didn't want that. I wanted to learn how to actually do telepathy with my own abilities. I know we all have the capacity to do so. And, I kind of wonder, the story in the Bible of the Tower of Babel, maybe we were all telepathic before they were introduced to languages. And languages are such a source of misunderstanding, even between families and cultures and communities. Words mean different things. And words also control our reality.
Right.
And with telepathy, there's much more freedom. So it's a very intimate environment because there's nothing hidden. Things are very well understood what is meant or what is needed.
Yeah. So I would say telepathy is a universal language, not requiring an
Yeah.
interpretation or a breakdown of or separation from people or or
And
beings.
it's not dependent on the understanding of words because words are like little packets of energy. They form our reality. How do we how do we talk about things we don't have language for? And what's missing from our societies is language and concepts about transdimensional travel, interdimensional beings. Now, Aboriginal groups had a handle on it, but what's happened to Aboriginal groups? They've basically been destroyed or changed into such a way as to force them to lose their culture. And there's very few Aboriginal groups that actually still have their original culture, their original understanding of reality. And if there was a way to embed ourselves in there and into their communities, boy, I bet you we'd learn a lot. And so I don't know how you feel about that, but
Yeah,
that's
it's
how I
interesting.
how I see.
If you speak on that subject, and I look in and I relate it towards the Akashic records, for example, I know I'm receiving
Mhm.
information that's not a specific language itself, but the holographic imagery creates an interpretation for
Yes.
me, a clear imagery that would also lead to the same conclusion from somebody else who received that information. So a picture's worth 1,000 words. I mean, if you see a picture, you don't really need so many words to describe it, or you don't need to describe it because you see it. Um, in terms of this being on the big ship, was it clear, or was it stated where the ship comes from specifically, or was it just a specific?
Um, it took because my experience was so physical, Adam, it took me a while to understand.
Right.
So I actually had to go to my guides, and there is one being, I call him Bob the Gray. He looks like a stereotypical gray. He meets up with me in the spirit realm or in the astral realm, and he releases information, helps to release my memories, and helps me to understand things. So I would say I call him Bob. That's not really his name. Again, telepathy, the whole concept of naming is very different.
Right.
The concept of a name is sort of the visual image of the being, and then a couple of uh, attributes that they have, kind of attached. That's how we identify each other. But I call him Bob the Grain. He doesn't mind. So he's got it, believe it or not, he has a sense of humor. But anyway, he helped me to understand that the big ship is nowhere, everywhere, and here. So, what it is, I want everyone to imagine a bunch of ovals, and each, I'm going to describe a Venn diagram. So each oval represents a different position in the multiverse, a different dimensional reality, a different realm, a spiritual realm, physical realms, different timelines. Imagine 1,000 of these, and they're arranged like a flower petal, like a daisy, and they all overlap in the center. There's one spot where everything overlaps, and that's what we would call an interdimensional envelope. And that's where the big ship sits. So it's very easy to bring people into physicality on board from this interesting multi dimensional, transdimensional, interdimensional envelope. And that's where the big ship is. So when you go there, you're traveling outside of time and space. And time and space are not even relevant. And that's why there's a huge time differential. So, for instance, in my orientation process, I was assigned a buddy, and she was showing me, where I would sleep and different things. And I was concerned because I got a cat and I love my cat, and nobody would know that I was away. Who's going to take care of my cat? Like, I was really concerned. And she let me know that I would be there for some period of time as I would experience it. But then I'd wake up and it would be the very next morning back on Earth. So my experiences happened literally Earth time every night while I was asleep for 3 months. And then it stopped. But while I was away, I could be away for days, weeks, even months, learning, training, having adventures. And then I would wake up and boom, I'd be back on Earth. And it was always a real bummer to come back because I had a level of health aboard the big ship that I had never experienced here on Earth. And when I would come back into my body with its aches and pains and all those things, it was plus facing our society and how backward and behind we are. It was really challenging. Plus, I had gone through so much. So my mind or my brain had all these adventures, and then I'd have the day, and there's no way I could even sort it all out, make sense of it within the day. And then boom, at night I'd be back, and I'd be back exactly where I left off, and I might be there for another month, weeks. It was actually a devastating experience. I was really messed up. I completely isolated myself from everybody. I was alone with my cat. I would go for walks. I could barely even go do my shopping because my head was so full with all of these incredible experiences, and I didn't know what to do with them. And I didn't even, at first, I thought I was dreaming, and then I thought I was crazy. Like, seriously, I
Yeah.
couldn't make sense of it. It's taken me years. This was back in 2014. It's taken me years to really get it sorted out to the point that I could put it in some kind of order and description and produce the book. So, you hear other experiencers going, "Oh, yeah, last night I got picked up by a spaceship and we went to Mars and we did this and that. And then I came home in time for breakfast and got on with my day." And I'm going, wow, how could that be possible? I'm not saying I don't believe them, but
Yeah.
I'm saying this is not small stuff.
Right. Right.
This really shakes you up. And then, of course, I knew not to go to mental health because I thought they would give me a negative label. And that's a really, I get into that in the book also in great detail, that's part, like I'm not a doctor and I'm not giving anyone medical advice here. Y'all do what you got to do, and what works for you, great. But for me, I believe that so-called mental health has been, for the last 500 years, has been a major contributing factor for stopping us from sharing these experiences with the public, so that the public doesn't even know these experiences are possible. It's a huge threat to the false matrix that we live in.
Yeah, that's a very that's there's other questions in between what you just said and now, but just jumping upon that particular subject or the words you just spoke, it's so interesting that we've been over the last 4 or 5 years put in this position to at least be able to separate not separate ourselves, but distance ourselves from ideology that doesn't work for us. And it so happens
Mhm.
that people like yourself I've resonated with. And in terms of the information that's coming through, I have not had that experience, but yet what I hear from you resonates to me profoundly. And I've run into, or I've had contacts with people who've had these experiences, not just on doing the podcast itself, but resonating energetically and understanding a connection between that dark night of the soul experience and everything just falling apart and then eventually standing in one's power. And I think your story is inspiring because it shows that path, exactly that. The ability to not have to care what anybody else thinks, but to know your story and know your truth. And you do know your truth.
Mhm.
And as I read the book, the beginning parts of it, I heard, as I mentioned earlier, speaking or reading about your upbringing and knowing when to delve into something and knowing when not to delve into something, but just leading the information, which is breadcrumbs, to help further your movement towards this particular time in your life. I read something
Mhm.
interesting what you wrote about I think it was your grandmother who was connected or had experiences and I was deeply interested in that because most people say, are you the only one in the family to experience this, or do you have relatives or other people who might have experienced something like this? And could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, my grandmother was an amazing person. Of course, everyone just thought she was crazy, but they also took advantage of her healing knowledge. So when she was a little girl, she grew up in Eastern Canada and in a logging community, which was out in the middle of nowhere, a logging camp. And there was no other children for her to play with. And she would go off into the woods and come back with these fantastic stories about these people, beings that were her friends. And everyone just kind of thought, oh, because she was a child, that's her make believe friends because she's lonely and she's got to make it up so that, she has someone to play with. And um, but then as she grew older, she ended up getting married very young. I think she was 14 and my grandfather was 17, and then he was off in World War One. And she kept these contacts, but now she was able to communicate. I would call it transdimensionally. She was able to communicate through telepathy, and they were always with her. And they taught her so much. She had almost no education, like maybe what we would consider grade five education. But she knew all these different healing modalities. And as she grew up as a mother and in different communities, this is only my grandmother, but she traveled with her husband and kids in a covered wagon across Canada. This is back in the pioneer days.
Wow,
Just
wow.
shows you how old I am. But when they would settle in different communities, she would go, if there was a doctor, she'd go with them to help birth babies. If there was no doctor, she acted as midwife. But she always knew what to do for people's ailments. And so she was very well respected and very much appreciated for that. So that kind of overrode the that she's crazy part. They didn't care if she's crazy, at least she knows how to heal people, right?
Right, right, right.
And one one incident that I talk about in the book is she was living in a small town, and this is probably in the 40s. And a neighbor man had had back surgery, and he was in a body cast, and he was in so much pain. He was just moaning and groaning so loud that it was upsetting the whole community. And my grandmother had my uncles go out and shoot a skunk, but they had to kill it quick kill it so before it got startled, so it still had its stink gland intact, and to remove the stink gland and bring it to grandma. And she cooked it up in a great uh big giant pot on a wood stove, and she added fat and herbs and different things. And then when it was ready, she ladled it out and built like a giant Q-tip made out of a stick with a rag on the end, like a swab. And
Yeah.
she went over and she dipped this in the solution, and then she stuck it down to soak his back underneath the cast. And it was the only thing that relieved his pain
Wow.
and was
Wow.
so soothing to him. He was able to sleep, he was able to heal. Like, how could she come to that on her own? Her guides, her invisible or her transdimensional beings were able to interface with her. And I fortunately really picked up on that. Now, my mother, she's kind of a different story. She had incredible paranormal gifts, but my mother was really, um, what was really important to her was to move up socially in cities and to become, wealthy and well thought of. And so she hid a lot of her abilities, and she preferred to think that her mother was crazy. But it was interesting because then my mother went on where people would come to her for medical advice, and she had no training. My mom didn't even have grade 12 education. And people, as an adult, I'd go visit her, and there'd be people lined up. Oh, the living room would be full. There'd be people lined up out the sidewalk to the street, then down the sidewalk, waiting for healing from my mom. And neither my mom nor my grandmother, neither one of them charged money. They just helped people. So that was pretty interesting. And then there's me. And that in the book, I get into pretty much about when I started having paranormal experiences and the different kinds of paranormal experiences. They're very different. And but it wasn't until I left religion, and I'm not saying religion is bad. If it's working for you, great. But for me, it held me back. And I kept going to churches because I kept wanting explanations for these other realities that I was acutely aware of. But I kept getting told, oh, that's demons, that's devil worship, you're opening yourself up to darkness, don't do that. That's really bad. Read your Bible, read your Bible, read your Bible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but after I left religion, that is when I had the experience where I found that I was able to share consciousness with other creatures, like for instance, my cat and also an eagle. So I'll just tell you really quick about the eagle experience for those that haven't read the book yet. I was at a place on Vancouver Island called Stodom Falls, and there's a whole bunch of little waterfalls and a lot of fossils and a lot of shale. And there's these big rocks, and I was laying suntanning on a big rock looking up at the sky, and I saw an eagle way up there doing its spirals around.
Mm.
And I went, oh my God, I want to see what that eagle sees. And just for a flash, I saw what the eagle saw, and I saw myself down on the rock. And it blew my mind. And I kept trying to make it happen. And it wouldn't happen. It didn't happen. But I practiced. And eventually I was able to do it again and again for
Wow.
very short periods of time and see the aerial, view of the evergreens and the gravel roads and the hillsides, and it was just so incredible. I love that. I love that so much. I've done that several times throughout my life. And then
Yeah.
another time, quite by accident, I ended up sharing consciousness with my cat that was chasing a spider under the bed, and it was at night, and I could feel this big ruckus under my bed. And all of a sudden, boom, I could see what my cat saw. I could see the spider. And what was interesting, I had no idea until this experience that spiders actually have pigment on their bodies, that when a cat is looking at them, this pigment reflects the light, because you know how their eyes reflect light,
Right. Right. Right.
and
Wow.
then it reflects back, and it looks like these, like, looking at something under a black light, the way colors look under a black light. And I
Right.
thought,
Right.
well, no wonder she's in such hot pursuit, right? And that was completely by accident. So that's just a couple of examples that I get into long before my ET contact. But then by the time I was an adult, I was kind of screwed up, and religiousified, and oh my God, I had to sort my out.
Yeah.
And the only way I could do that was to do it one step at a time, one string at a time. It's kind of like if you have a bunch of yarn and it's in a big knot and you're trying to find the ends to untangle it. That's what my life was like. And I'd get a hold of one section of string and I'd find out where's it caught and unravel that and find out where that leads me and eventually pull that string out. It's done, and then go back to the mess and work on the next thing. So so now here I am. I published the book. What a relief. I can't tell you, I was just compelled to do it. I'm actually working on another book right now where I'm using AI to generate the images. And it's a book about the Greys. It's not about the Greys because I have very little experience with them, but it's to help reduce fear so that people, because I think we're going to be seeing more and more and more presence. Plus, I don't know where this comes from. I just get like this gnawing messages to do something, just like I did for the book, and I got it done. And now the second book to help reduce people's fear by seeing all different kinds of grays. There's all different family lines, races. Some look quite close to humans, some look different. The only thing they all have in common is they do not carry the kind of pigment that would reflect the colors that we see with our eyes, with the color spectrum that we can see. Doesn't mean they don't have color, just we're not able to pick it up.
Yeah.
So, and anyway, I didn't want to get too much into that, what's coming, but
Well,
yeah,
yeah, that's
so
actually that's actually what I was thinking about. What, like, I'm in New Jersey, and so we've had this influx of information of either a layer of sabotage blocking out what lies behind it. And from my interpretation, that's exactly what's taking place, is that we're being distracted from a presence that's trying to
mhm.
make its presence known and assist. And I've watched so many different. I've read stories. I've seen clips of military having nuclear ballistic missile heads being destroyed by either beings from different groups that have just made reduced the nuclear head to nil, and the
Mm.
reports from the military. So I that's my insight is telling me that we know the presence is coming, and we're distracting the audience with something else. We're throwing the bone, so to speak, in one direction and having everybody chase it. When
Yeah.
and I wanted to maybe
Yep.
you received some insight into your connection or your insight.
Well,
What you thought?
I'll tell you my take on it. My take on it is that right now the world's a mess.
Yep.
There's a small group of people, like less than 1%, who hold 99% of the money, power, resources,
Yep.
that we're all under mind control. It's all a psyop. We don't know whether we're coming or going. Everybody's fighting with everybody, taking sides, and that's all by design. And I am not intimately connected with the Greys, but I have friends who are. And what I understand is through their love of humankind, it would be a terrible waste to see humanity destroy itself for the sake of a few nut jobs
Yep.
who want to convince us that they have some kind of right to the power and direction of the planet. And I loosely believe that they are psychopaths. Psychopaths actually have the advantage of no conscious. Um, excuse me. What I mean by no conscience is if they do something bad, they don't feel bad about it. They just part of their big evil plan. But they also lack creativity and spirituality and sensitivity and all those other things that we have. And the more of that we have, kind of the more we suffer in this world when we look out and see what's going on. So I believe that benevolent ETs, and I believe that I don't know if all of them are benevolent, but certainly I would say the vast majority are do care, and they don't want to interfere. They want us to find our own way out. But if it's going to be the whole society being destroyed, that, what a waste of human beings. So, long story short, getting onto all the sightings lately in the drones, a certain amount of them are domestic. They are done by like Lockheed Skunk Work and Raytheon and who knows who. And that is to distract us and confuse us from the actual ETs who are also trying to make their presence known. And as it's my understanding that at this point, they don't want to interfere. They just want to make their presence known so that we can go, okay, wow, this sure changes things. And it helps us to break out of the construct. It helps us to break out of our conditioning, to know that there's something else, to ask questions, to be wondering about what they might be or what they might want. And then there's certainly enough humans who are having contact that are also writing books. Preston Dennett's a wonderful resource for people who want to learn more about the Greys. And he's been an investigator for a long time, and he's written over 30 books, and he's one of the world's experts on extraterrestrials. He's a wonderful resource. I would direct people towards his books and his shows. And he does a show called The Light Gate every Monday night with Dolly Saffron. She is a fully conscious lifetime experiencer with the Greys. So I think that some of it is absolutely extraterrestrial, transdimensional. The way they blip in and out of reality, very transdimensional. Transdimensional is the way things are done. I mean, let's face it, are you going to get into a spaceship and travel for thousands of years to try to get from point A to point B? Or would you use technologies that let you change point A into point B instantly? And that's how transdimensional beings travel. I get into a lot of that in the book as well. So a lot of unanswered questions people have, you're probably going to find in my book. And
Yeah.
it's not a difficult read. It's not a huge long story. It's only like, I don't know, 165 pages or something. But I think it will answer a lot of questions that people have. And so, what's going on today? Very interesting. But the world has never been on the brink of World War III. All the problems that are being uncovered. Oh my gosh, like for instance, we're finding out our food really is toxic and been tampered with. The
Yeah.
medical industries are holding us back from health. Everything is the opposite than what we thought. Um, you know, um, Plant medicines are considered dangerous and bad, but pharmaceuticals are addicting. More people are dying from pharmaceuticals than from anything else, any of the wars, anything else. Like there's so much corruption, and I think it's going to get a little worse before it gets better because people have to really realize. So since 2019, it's been one eye-opening event after another. And so people are waking up like crazy. And then those of us that are one step ahead of them are offering the support and the reason and the calmness and the stability to give them a hand to help them through so they can meet us where we're at. And then I believe the next stage after that is so that we can be open to learning from our extraterrestrial, transdimensional brothers, sisters, cousins. And what an incredible reality we actually do live in
Yes.
once we can poke our head outside of the construct and see what's really happening.
That's well said. And I think your book is an excellent um, channel that gives insight, or gives a person the ability to see the formation of your life and how you've come to this place and where you are right now. Um, so maybe you could leave the audience with a message about, something that you'd like to share.
Yeah, I would say the number one thing is to step outside of fear. And I know that's easier said than done, but we can start challenging our fears on a very small scale and working our way up, but leave room for a reality that is completely different than what we're taught is real. Allow just space for it. And in that space, things will become manifest that we didn't realize, and we'll have realizations. So I think the biggest thing is to step outside of fear And then after that is to take really good care of the temple body. Now, nobody's perfect, but we need to look at what we're eating, what we're drinking, what we're using for entertainment. Are we getting fresh air and sunshine? Are we learning to meditate? Are we able to get outside and just observe the birds and the natural world and reconnect and disconnect from our screens?
Yeah.
Understanding that we are all addicted to the dopamine rushes that we get when we're connected to screens, and how it's really important to limit that the same way I would limit caffeine in my own life, because too much is not good for me, but a little bit, is okay and maybe even necessary. Um, and then I think it's also important for people to find out what is love. And I get into that a great deal in the book. And especially, I get into it in the beginning in chapter 2, but I really get into it in chapter 8, where I get into what love is and how the ETs vibe on the universal love harmonic. That's what runs their society. And what is love? It's not all about romance and roses. It's about self-discipline. It's about patience. It's about learning to stay calm, learning different ways of resolving conflict, all kinds of things, taking care of our own mental health, taking care of our own spirituality. Like all of those things are super important, and we need to love ourselves before we can start loving others. And that's the part that's missing. We're not taught how to love ourselves. And part of self love is self soothing and all the wonderful things that make life peaceful and wonderful to be alive for this very short few moments that you and I experience as our lifetime. And a lot of people can't see it till they get older. But boy, when the older you get, the more you can see. It's
Yeah.
fleeting and it goes by so fast. So I think that's it. And then the other part is ET is not going to rescue us. They might rescue some of us, but they're not going to just evacuate the mess and take it elsewhere. Not going to happen. And they have faith that we can do this. We can wake up. We can be full of courage. We can withstand the pressures and to operate on an independent life course, one that suits us and benefits us. And we know we're not children. We don't need experts to tell us. We know,
Yep.
as a species, or I should say, a race of humanoids, we know. And that's sort of what I want to be the takeaway. And I really hope everyone enjoys the book.
Well, yeah, and I just want to show the audience one more time the book. I don't know if it comes in clearly. Transdimensional, Meet the New Neighbors, and where can people purchase the book?
It's available as a paperback and also Kindle at Amazon worldwide. So no matter what country you're in, if there's Amazon service, you can get a hold of the book. It's only in English at this point, and there's an Audible version that's coming out soon. But because it's a new publication, if you just go to Amazon and type in the name of the book, you may get no search results. So you need to go to the menu tab and find the bookstore or the Kindle store, click on that, and then it has its own search bar, and then type in the name of the book and me, or just the name of the book, and it'll pop up and they can order it and have it delivered
Yeah,
within just a few days. So,
yeah, I'll
mhm.
put the link below. Um,
Thank you.
and if you could just leave the audience with where they can reach you or your website.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Adam. And before I forget, thank you so much for having me on your show. Always a pleasure. I really appreciate you and the work that you do, and love having you on my shows. So people can find me through my website, www.karenholtonhealthcoach.com. Obviously, I'm a different kind of health coach. That's KARENHOLTON healthcoach.com. Everything's in there. I have a free course that will help you to be more in line with yourself and reality, make it easier to have interdimensional contact, I've got a shop if you want to help support my work. I've got tons of free resources under the free resources tab. And then, of course, you can find me on most um, audio video platforms like YouTube at Karen Holton TV. I have the Quantum Guide show with Karen Holton every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And I have the Aliens and Angels podcast every Sunday, an hour earlier at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And I'm part of the Forbidden Knowledge Network. And so all my podcasts are available also on all audio platforms. I think I've covered everything. Thank you so much, Adam.
Yeah, so I want to thank you for sharing your time and your wisdom, insight, and courage to be able to share your story on paper. And as we know in life, it's sometimes people don't know how to tell their own stories, their own pains, because they feel like they weaken themselves or they can't be
Mm,
vulnerable. But I think your vulnerability shines through and your wisdom peaks and expands from that point. So I think it's an inspiration for many people to be able to know that we can go on, we can learn, you can use our past experiences to evolve and to change and to become something more than we were. And especially,
absolutely.
yeah. So I want to thank you for joining me.
It's not what happened. Oh, sorry, go
No,
ahead.
go ahead and tell me,
I was
tell
just
me.
going to say it's not what happened to us, it's what we do with it that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry. Anyway, didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah.
No,
So thanks again, Adam.
yeah, yeah. Thank you for joining me, and we'll meet again. And I'll set up other interviews where we have a groups, and we'll try to you know share information.